When Emma and her husband, Daniel, moved into their new suburban home, they thought they had found their dream neighborhood. The streets were lined with towering oak trees. Children played outside until sunset, and the houses had a charming uniformity that made everything feel safe. But one house stood out from the rest. Directly across from their home was an old, unkempt property with peeling paint, overgrown bushes, and a cracked driveway. Its blinds were always drawn, and the porch light flickered as though it could go out at any moment. Emma noticed it the first day they moved in. "Looks like we've got the neighborhood haunted house," Daniel joked as he unloaded boxes from the moving truck. Emma forced a laugh, but the house gave her an uneasy feeling. Over the next few days, Emma noticed small things. The curtains in the old house would shift slightly, as though someone was watching. A shadow would pass by the window, but never linger long enough for her to make out a face. She mentioned it to Daniel, but he shrugged it off. "Probably just an old recluse," he said. "Nothing to worry about." Emma tried to focus on unpacking and settling in, but the feeling of being watched lingered. One evening, as she watered the front garden, she felt it again. She glanced up and saw the blinds in the upstairs window snap shut. Her heart raced. Emma finally met the neighbors during a block party a few weeks later. The atmosphere was lively, with laughter and the smell of barbecue filling the air. As she mingled, she decided to bring up the house across the street. "Oh, that's Mr. Carter's place," said Marcy, a bubbly woman who lived 2 doors down. "He's been there forever, keeps to himself. A little odd, but harmless." "What do you mean by odd?" Emma asked, trying to sound casual. Marcy leaned in, lowering her voice. "People say he's paranoid. He's got cameras all over his house, but you'd never know it, and he's always watching. A bit creepy, if you ask me." The conversation left Emma unsettled. That night she couldn't sleep. She found herself staring out the window at the dark silhouette of Mr. Carter's house. Was he watching her right now? Weeks turned into months, and the incidents escalated. One morning, Emma found deep scratches on the side of their car. Another time, their trash cans were knocked over, the contents strewn across the lawn. Daniel insisted it was raccoons, but Emma wasn't so sure. Then came the night Emma saw him. She was up late, working in the home office on the 2nd floor. The blinds were open, giving her a clear view of the street below. Movement caught her eye. She saw a figure standing in Mr. Carter's yard, partially obscured by the overgrown bushes. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing her house. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She turned off her desk lamp to get a better look, but by the time her eyes adjusted to the darkness, the figure was gone. She woke Daniel and told him what she'd seen. "It's probably just your imagination," he said groggily, "or maybe a trick of the light." Emma wanted to believe him, but deep down, she knew better. Things took a darker turn when Emma started finding notes. The first one was slipped under their front door. It was written on a torn piece of paper in jagged, uneven handwriting. "I see you." Emma's hands trembled as she showed it to Daniel. "We need to call the police," she said. "And tell them what? That we got a creepy note?" "They won't do anything," he replied. The second note appeared a week later, taped to their mailbox. "You're not safe." By then, Emma was terrified. She started keeping all the blinds closed and double-checking the locks on every door and window. Daniel tried to reassure her, but she could see the worry in his eyes. One night, Emma's worst fears came true. She was home alone, curled up on the couch with a blanket, when the power went out. The house plunged into darkness, and her heart raced. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. As she made her way to the breaker box, she heard it. faint tapping at the front window. She froze, her breath hitching. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. She crept to the window, her flashlight shaking in her hand. She pulled back the curtain just enough to peek outside. What she saw made her scream. Mr. Carter was standing on her porch, his face pressed against the glass. His eyes were wide and unblinking, and his mouth was twisted into a chilling grin. Before she could react, he slammed his fist against the window, cracking the glass. Emma ran upstairs and locked herself in the bedroom. She called Daniel, who promised to come home immediately. She also called the police, who assured her they were on their way. When the police arrived, Mr. Carter was gone. They found no signs of forced entry, but the cracked window and Emma's frantic state convinced them to take her seriously. They promised to patrol the area more frequently. Daniel installed security cameras the next day, but Emma no longer felt safe in their home. Every creak and shadow made her jump. She barely slept, her mind plagued by nightmares of Mr. Carter's face at the window. The final straw came a week later. Emma checked the security footage one morning and found a chilling recording. At 3 a.m., Mr. Carter had walked up to their front door and stood there for several minutes, staring at the camera. Then he leaned in close and whispered something. Emma played the audio back repeatedly, trying to make out the words. Finally, she understood. You can't hide forever. They moved out a month later. Emma never learned what drove Mr. Carter to torment them, but she heard rumors from the neighbors. Some said he had a history of mental illness. Others claimed he was obsessed with anyone new to the neighborhood. Whatever the truth, Emma was just glad to leave. But sometimes late at night, she dreams of him. She dreams of his face at the window, his grin wider than it should be, and his voice whispering in the darkness. I see you. After moving into their first home together, Lauren and Matt felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The house was a fixer-upper, but the price was right, and the neighborhood seemed quiet. Their next-door neighbor, an older man named Mr. Grayson, introduced himself the first day they moved in. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, a warm smile on his face. He wore a weathered flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Lauren found him charming, but Matt was less convinced. "He's nice, but there's something off about him," Matt said later that evening. "You're just being paranoid," Lauren replied. But in the weeks that followed, she began to notice things that made her question her initial impression. Mr. Grayson always seemed to be outside, no matter the time of day. Whether Lauren was watering the garden in the morning or taking out the trash late at night, he would appear. Sometimes he waved and smiled, but other times he simply stood there, watching. One afternoon, as Lauren worked in the backyard, she heard the unmistakable sound of a camera shutter. She looked up quickly, but no one was there. Shrugging it off, she convinced herself she was imagining things. That night, while going through the mail, she found an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photograph, a candid shot of her in the backyard, taken earlier that day. "Matt, look at this," she said, her voice trembling. "Someone's been watching me." Matt examined the photo, his jaw tightening. "This is sick. I'll install some cameras tomorrow." The cameras didn't deter whoever was watching them. In fact, the voyeur seemed to escalate. Lauren and Matt found footprints in the flower beds beneath their windows, scratches on the back door, and more photographs in their mailbox. One morning, they discovered a message scrawled on their garage door in red paint. "You can't hide." The couple reported everything to the police, but with no concrete evidence, there was little they could do. Lauren began to feel like a prisoner in her own home, constantly looking over her shoulder. One night, as a storm raged outside, the power went out. Lauren and Matt lit candles and tried to make the best of it. But as they sat in the living room, they heard a loud thud from upstairs. Matt grabbed a flashlight and told Lauren to stay put. Minutes passed, and then Lauren heard a scream. She ran upstairs to find Matt, standing in their bedroom, staring at the open closet. He shone the flashlight inside, revealing a hidden door in the back wall. It was locked from the inside, Matt said, his voice shaky. Whoever was in there must have just left. They called the police, who searched the house, but found no one. The hidden room was small and empty, but what disturbed them most was the discovery of a small peephole that looked directly into their bedroom. The next day, Mr. Grayson came by to check on them. "Heard about the commotion last night," he said, his smile as warm as ever. "Everything all right?" Matt was terse. "We're fine." Lauren tried to read Mr. Grayson's expression, but it was inscrutable. Did he know about the hidden room? Was he the one watching them? Determined to get answers, Matt and Lauren decided to do some digging. They visited the local records office to learn more about their house's history. What they found was chilling. The previous owner, a single woman, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors reported seeing her arguing with a man shortly before her disappearance, but no charges were ever filed. The man's description matched Mr. Grayson. That night, Lauren couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the old house set her nerves on edge. Around midnight, she heard a tapping sound on the bedroom window. She woke Matt, who grabbed a bat and went to investigate. Peeking through the blinds, he saw Mr. Grayson standing in their yard, holding something in his hand. Matt flung open the window and yelled, "Get off our property, or I'm calling the police." Mr. Grayson didn't move. Instead, he raised his hand to reveal a keychain with an old, rusted key. He held it up as if offering it to them, then turned and walked away. The next day, Matt found the key on their porch. It was old and heavy, with no markings to indicate what it might unlock. Lauren wanted to throw it away, but Matt insisted on keeping it, convinced it was a clue. They searched the house from top to bottom, but found nothing the key could open. Then Matt had an idea. The basement. They had avoided the basement since moving in, as it was dark, damp, and full of cobwebs. But now it seemed like the logical place to look. In the far corner of the basement, hidden behind stacks of old boxes, they found a locked trunk. The key fit perfectly. Inside, they found photographs, journals, and videotapes, all documenting the life of the previous owner. Among the items was a journal entry that sent chills down Lauren's spine. "He watches me through the walls. He knows my every move. I can't escape him." They turned the evidence over to the police, who reopened the case. Mr. Grayson was questioned but denied any involvement. Without concrete proof, he wasn't charged. But Lauren and Matt didn't stick around to find out what might happen next. They moved out a week later, leaving the house and its secrets behind. But Lauren still dreams of the hidden room and the man who watched them, wondering if he's found his next victims. When Megan moved into her new apartment complex, she was relieved to find a quiet and peaceful environment. The building was modest, with a mix of young professionals and retirees, and her unit was on the top floor, offering a small balcony that overlooked the courtyard. It was perfect, or so she thought. Her immediate neighbor was a middle-aged man named Mr. Doyle. He kept to himself and rarely spoke to anyone, but Megan didn't mind. In fact, she found it refreshing to have a neighbor who valued privacy as much as she did. "He's harmless," said her friend Clara, who had come over to help her unpack. "Just a quiet guy. Probably has his own routine." But Megan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. There was an air of unease that clung to him, like a shadow he couldn't shake. The first strange occurrence happened a week after Megan moved in. She was unlocking her door when she noticed a faint, rhythmic tapping sound. She paused, listening carefully. It seemed to be coming from Mr. Doyle's apartment. She pressed her ear to the wall but couldn't make out what it was. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she heard it again. Tap, 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 followed by a faint, scraping noise. She told herself it was probably just the pipes or an old appliance, but it left her uneasy. One morning, Megan stepped out onto her balcony with a cup of coffee. She glanced over at Mr. Doyle's balcony and froze. He was standing there, staring directly at her. His eyes were dark, and his face was expressionless. She forced a polite smile, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and went back inside, shutting the door behind him. From that day on, Megan started noticing him more often. He would appear in the hallway as she was leaving for work, or linger in the courtyard when she was returning home. He never spoke, never acknowledged her presence, but his gaze was always unsettlingly intense. One evening, Megan invited Clara over for dinner. As they ate, she mentioned her growing discomfort with Mr. Doyle. "He's probably just socially awkward," Clara said, trying to reassure her. "You're overthinking it." But Megan wasn't convinced. Later that night, after Clara had left, Megan found a folded piece of paper slipped under her door. Her heart raced as she opened it. The note read, "You shouldn't have told her." Megan's blood ran cold. She locked all her doors and windows and double-checked the chain on the front door. She spent the rest of the night on the couch, clutching her phone and jumping at every sound. The following days were tense. Megan avoided Mr. Doyle as much as possible, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her. She began hearing the tapping noises more frequently, sometimes late at night, accompanied by faint whispers. She tried turning up the volume on her TV to drown it out, but it was no use. The sounds seemed to seep through the walls, invading her space. One night, unable to take it anymore, Megan banged on the wall separating their apartments. "Keep it down!" she yelled. The tapping stopped instantly. For a moment there was silence, and Megan felt a flicker of relief. Then, from the other side of the wall, she heard a low, guttural laugh. Desperate for answers, Megan decided to talk to the building manager. Mrs. Caldwell, an elderly woman who had managed the complex for decades, listened sympathetically as Megan explained her concerns. "Mr. Doyle has been here for years," Mrs. Caldwell said. "He's always been a bit peculiar, but he's never caused any trouble." Megan pressed her for more information, but Mrs. Caldwell only shrugged. "If he's bothering you, I'll have a word with him." That night, Megan's unease deepened. She felt as though she had crossed a line, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Doyle knew. Around 2 a.m., Megan woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. They were slow and deliberate, stopping right in front of her door. She held her breath, straining to hear. Then came the scratching, a slow, deliberate scraping against the door, like nails on wood. Terrified, Megan called the police. By the time they arrived, the hallway was empty. The officers checked Mr. Doyle's apartment, but he didn't answer the door. "There's nothing we can do unless he's actively threatening you," one of the officers said. "Call us if it happens again." The next day, Megan decided to do some investigating of her own. She searched online for any information about Mr. Doyle and the building. What she found was chilling. An article from 10 years ago about a missing woman who had lived in the same apartment complex. The article mentioned a suspect who was questioned but never charged. His name was Thomas Doyle. Megan's stomach churned. Could it be the same man? She tried to rationalize it, but the pieces were falling into place. That night, Megan's worst fears were realized. She woke to the sound of her front door creaking open. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, but before she could dial, the lights went out. She heard the soft thud of footsteps approaching her bedroom. She locked the door and pressed herself against it, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Go away!" she screamed. From the other side of the door, she heard his voice for the first time, a raspy whisper. "You shouldn't have looked me up." In a panic, Megan climbed out the window onto the fire escape and screamed for help. Lights flicked on in neighboring apartments, and someone called the police. When they arrived, Mr. Doyle was gone, and her apartment was in disarray. The police found no signs of forced entry, but they did discover a hidden compartment in his closet. Inside were photographs of Megan and a journal detailing her daily routines. Megan moved out the next day, leaving behind the apartment and its terrifying memories. Mr. Doyle was never found, but Megan couldn't escape the feeling that he was still watching her, waiting for the right moment to return. Claire and her husband, Adam, thought they had struck gold when they found the house. It was an older home nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood with plenty of space for their growing family. The price was surprisingly low, but the realtor had explained it away as a motivated sale. "It's perfect," Claire said as they signed the paperwork. She didn't know then how much she would come to regret those words. A week after they moved in, Claire noticed something odd. The basement door had a heavy padlock on it. She asked Adam if he'd noticed it during their walkthrough. "I assumed it was just a storage area," he said, shrugging. "We can cut the lock off later if we need to." They had enough on their plate with unpacking and settling in, so the basement remained unexplored. But Claire couldn't shake her curiosity. Why would someone padlock a door inside their own home? Their new neighbors were friendly, though they seemed hesitant when asked about the previous owners. "They kept to themselves," one woman said, looking uncomfortable. "Never saw them much." Another neighbor, an older man named Mr. Beck, was more forthcoming. "They left in a hurry," he said. "Never said why, just gone one day." Claire's unease grew, but Adam dismissed it. "People move for all kinds of reasons," he said. "Let's not start imagining things." That night, Claire heard noises. It was faint at first, a distant creaking that could easily be attributed to the house settling. But as the hours dragged on, the sounds grew louder. Footsteps, unmistakable, coming from the basement. "Adam, wake up," she whispered, shaking him. "Someone's in the house." He groggily got up and grabbed a baseball bat from the closet. They crept downstairs together, hearts pounding. The basement door was still locked, the padlock firmly in place. Adam checked the rest of the house but found nothing. "You probably just imagined it," he said. But Claire knew what she'd heard. The next morning, Claire called a locksmith to remove the padlock. Inside, the basement was dark and musty, with steep wooden stairs leading down into the gloom. Claire hesitated at the top of the stairs. "I'll go first," Adam said, switching on a flashlight. The basement was larger than they had expected, with several small rooms branching off the main space. It was empty except for a few pieces of broken furniture and piles of old newspapers. But as they explored, they found something that made their blood run cold. A small room with a cot, a bucket, and a chain bolted to the wall. "What the hell is this?" Adam whispered. Claire's stomach turned. Someone was living down here, or being kept here. They reported the discovery to the police, who took their statements and photographed the room. The officers promised to investigate, but days turned into weeks with no updates. Meanwhile, the noises continued. Claire became obsessed with the basement, convinced there was more to the story. She began noticing small things, the way the air felt colder near the basement door, the faint smell of mildew that seemed to linger no matter how much she cleaned. And then there were the objects that began appearing in the house. A child's shoe left on the stairs, a dusty toy truck in the hallway, things that didn't belong to them. "This is crazy," Adam said when she showed him the truck. "Maybe it was left behind by the previous owners." "Then how did it get upstairs?" Claire shot back. Adam didn't have an answer. One night, Claire decided to set up a camera in the basement. She told Adam it was to catch any wildlife that might have gotten in. In truth, she wanted proof of whatever was haunting them. The next morning, she reviewed the footage. For the first few hours, nothing happened. But around 3 a.m., the camera caught movement. A shadow crossed the frame, too large to be an animal. Then the camera was knocked over, and the footage ended. Claire showed the video to Adam, who finally agreed to call the police again. When the officers arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the basement, but found no signs of anyone. Frustrated and scared, Claire and Adam decided to stay at a hotel for a few nights. But even there, Claire felt uneasy. She woke in the middle of the night to find the television in their room on, though neither of them had turned it on. The screen was filled with static, and for a moment, she thought she saw a face staring back at her before it flickered off. When they returned home, they found their front door ajar. Inside, the house was in disarray. Drawers had been pulled out, furniture overturned, and the word "leave" was scrawled on the living room wall in what looked like black paint. They packed their things that same day, deciding to move in with Adam's parents until they could figure out their next steps. As they drove away, Claire glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing in the upstairs window was a figure, watching them. She couldn't make out the face, but she knew it wasn't Adam, and it definitely wasn't her. A few months later, they learned that the house had been bought by another family. Claire wanted to warn them, but decided against it. She told herself it wasn't her problem anymore. But late at night, she often wondered about the basement and the tenant who never truly left.